Every parent's worst nightmare is losing their child, but what happens when a child has already lost everything? On a cold evening in Cedar Falls, 8-year-old Sarah collapsed alone on Main Street, her small body too weak from days without food or shelter. Max, a golden retriever, broke free from his owner and refused to leave her side. When Henry Mitchell, a widowed shopkeeper, came to get his dog, he found something that changed everything. This little girl had nowhere to go and no one to call. What started as a dog's simple act of loyalty became the beginning of something. Neither Henry nor Sarah expected. Henry had been living alone since his wife died, and Sarah had been surviving on the streets. But when two broken hearts meet, healing can happen in the most unexpected ways. How do you rebuild a family when both people have lost everything they once held dear? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Mitchell's hardware store, casting long shadows across rows of nails, screws, and forgotten tools. Henry Mitchell moved through his daily routine with the precision of a man who had performed these same tasks for 37 years. At 62, his hands bore the calluses of honest work, and his silver hair held the memory of the auburn it once was. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that Margaret had fallen in love with, carried a weariness that went deeper than age. He unlocked the register with the same key his father had used, straightened the same displays his grandfather had arranged, and prepared for another day of serving a community that seemed to grow smaller with each passing season. Cedar Falls had once been a thriving railroad town, but now it survived on nostalgia and the determination of folks who refused to let their home disappear entirely. Max, his golden retriever, stretched lazily near the door, his amber coat catching the early light. The dog had been Margaret's idea, a companion for their golden years, she'd said. Now Max served as Henry's only conversation partner, a patient listener who never judged the rambling thoughts of a lonely widower. "Another day, old boy," Henry murmured, scratching behind Max's ears. The dog's tail thumped against the wooden floor, a sound that echoed in the too quiet space. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Henderson entered, clutching a broken garden hose coupling. Henry smiled, not because he was particularly happy, but because 37 years in retail had taught him that customers needed to see a welcoming face, even when your own heart felt like it was held together with duct tape and stubborn pride. "Morning. Dorothy, let me guess, that old hose is giving you trouble again?" "You know me too well, Henry." She placed the broken piece on the counter. "Harold always said I should replace the whole thing, but you know how I am about waste." Henry nodded, selecting a replacement from the wall display. Harold Henderson had been gone 3 years now, but Dorothy still spoke of him in present tense. Henry understood. Sometimes the present was too painful to acknowledge. As he rang up the sale, Dorothy's eyes softened with the expression Henry had grown to recognize. The look people gave widowers, full of pity and awkward kindness. "You know, Henry, my niece is visiting next month. She's a lovely woman, divorced, 2 grown children." "I appreciate the thought, Dorothy, but I'm doing just fine." Henry's voice carried the gentle firmness he'd perfected over the years. People meant well, but they couldn't understand that some hearts weren't meant to love twice. After Dorothy left, Henry returned to his inventory, counting washers and categorizing screws with the methodical attention of a man trying to keep his mind occupied. The store felt different since Margaret's death 2 years ago. She used to visit during lunch breaks from the library, bringing sandwiches and stories about the patrons she'd helped that day. Her laughter had filled the spaces between the shelves, making even the mundane feel warm. Now silence pressed against him like a physical weight. The small wooden box in his desk drawer held Margaret's wedding ring, the one she'd removed during her final weeks when her fingers became too thin to hold. Henry opened the drawer several times each day, not to look at the ring, but to remind himself that their love had been real. Some days, the memories felt so distant, he worried they might disappear entirely. Margaret had fought cancer with the same gentle determination she brought to everything else. Even at the end, she'd worried more about Henry than herself. "Promise me you won't become one of those bitter old men who drives away everyone who cares about them," she'd whispered during one of their final conversations. "I promise," he'd lied. Because sometimes love requires dishonesty. But he had become exactly what she'd feared. Not bitter exactly, but closed off, wrapped in routines that kept the world at arm's length. Max was his only concession to companionship, and even that relationship was more duty than joy. The afternoon brought its usual parade of customers, farmers needing fence repairs, homeowners tackling weekend projects, and elderly residents who visited more for conversation than commerce. Henry helped them all with professional courtesy, but part of him remained distant, protected behind the counter that had become his fortress. As closing time approached, Henry began his evening routine. He balanced the register, swept the floors, and arranged the displays for tomorrow's customers. Max waited patiently by the door, knowing that soon they'd make their evening walk down Main Street, the same route they'd taken every night for 2 years. The walk served multiple purposes. It gave Max exercise, allowed Henry to check on the other businesses along the strip, and provided the illusion of purpose. But mostly, it filled the time between work and sleep, when loneliness threatened to overwhelm his carefully constructed defenses. Meanwhile, 8 blocks away in an abandoned lot behind the old Woolworth building, Sarah huddled beneath a cardboard shelter that wouldn't survive another rain. At 8 years old, she possessed survival instincts that would impress a Navy SEAL and a wariness of adults that ran bone deep. Sarah's story began with love, her grandmother's fierce, protective love that had shielded her from a chaotic world. Eleanor Davies had raised Sarah after her daughter's overdose, creating a small sanctuary filled with bedtime stories, homemade cookies, and the kind of security that lets children believe the world is fundamentally safe. But grandmothers aren't immortal, and when Eleanor's heart finally gave out last winter, Sarah's world collapsed. The state had plans for her. Foster care, they said, with a nice family who specialized in difficult cases. But Sarah had learned early that adult promises were fragile things, easily broken when circumstances changed. The first foster home lasted 2 months. The family meant well, but they already had 3 other children, and Sarah was just another mouth to feed, another behavior to manage. When she wet the bed or cried for her grandmother in the middle of the night, patience wore thin quickly. The second placement lasted 6 weeks. The foster father worked double shifts, and the foster mother spent most of her time managing her own biological children. Sarah became invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of someone else's family. By the third home, Sarah had learned to pack light and trust no one. The foster parents were older, empty nesters who thought they wanted to help a child, but they expected gratitude for their kindness, compliance with their rules, and transformation into the daughter they'd never had. When Sarah couldn't or wouldn't become their vision of the perfect rescue story, they returned her to the system with apologetic explanations about not being the right fit. That's when Sarah decided she was done being placed. The streets were dangerous, but they were honest about their dangers. Foster care promised safety, but delivered disappointment, and disappointment hurt worse than hunger. She'd been surviving on her own for 3 weeks, moving from shelter to shelter, avoiding both police and predators with the cunning of a wild animal. She ate from dumpsters behind restaurants, slept in doorways when weather permitted, and learned that staying invisible was the key to survival. But even street-smart 8-year-olds have limits. The fever started 2 days ago, making her thoughts fuzzy and her steps unsteady. She'd found medicine in a convenience store dumpster, expired children's Tylenol that took the edge off but didn't cure whatever was making her body ache. Food had become scarce as her energy depleted, and clean water was harder to find than she'd expected. On this particular evening, As Henry and Max began their routine walk, Sarah was curled behind a dumpster 6 blocks away, shivering despite the mild temperature. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her fever-addled mind, singing the lullabies that had once made everything feel safe. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Grandma's gonna buy you a mockingbird." She didn't know that in 30 minutes her path would intersect with a lonely widower and a golden retriever, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform 3 lives forever. She didn't know that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of kindness. All she knew was that she was tired of running, tired of being afraid, and tired of being alone. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall. Light drops that would soon become a steady downpour. Sarah pulled her thin jacket closer and wondered if she had enough strength left to find better shelter. In the distance, she could hear footsteps on the sidewalk, the measured pace of someone walking a dog. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, hoping to remain unnoticed, until the danger passed. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The rain came down harder now, turning the sidewalk slick and sending most sensible people indoors. But Henry Mitchell wasn't most people. He was a creature of habit, and habits didn't bend for weather. Max trotted beside him, unbothered by the water soaking his golden coat, his nose working overtime to process the amplified scents that rain brought to the evening air. They had just passed Murphy's diner when Max suddenly stopped, his head cocked, toward the alley between the old Woolworth building and Peterson's pharmacy. Henry tugged gently on the leash. "Come on, boy. We can't stand here all night getting soaked," but Max planted his feet with the stubborn determination only a dog can muster. His ears were forward, alert, and a soft whine escaped his throat. Not the playful sound he made when he wanted attention, but something deeper, more urgent. "What is it?" Henry followed Max's gaze into the darkened alley, squinting through the rain. At first, he saw nothing but shadows and the usual urban debris. Then Max pulled forward with unexpected force, nearly yanking the leash from Henry's grip. Max, no. The leash slipped through his wet fingers, and suddenly his dog was running into the alley with purpose Henry had rarely seen. Cursing under his breath, Henry followed, his shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the amber streetlight. He found Max 30 feet into the alley, lying down next to what Henry initially thought was a pile of discarded clothing. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, his breath caught in his throat. It was a child, a little girl with tangled brown hair, lying motionless on the wet pavement. Max had positioned himself alongside her small body, his warmth shielding her from the worst of the rain. The dog looked up at Henry with eyes that seemed to say, "Help her." Henry's knees creaked as he knelt beside them, his heart hammering against his ribs. The girl couldn't be more than 8 or 9 years old, wearing clothes that had seen better days and a thin jacket that offered little protection from the elements. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and when Henry pressed his fingers to her throat, he found a pulse that was too fast and too weak. "Jesus," he whispered, pulling out his cell phone. His fingers, normally steady from years of precise work, shook as he dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I found a little girl in the alley behind Woolworth's on Main Street. She's unconscious, and she looks like she's been out here for a while. Send an ambulance. Sir, can you tell me if she's breathing? Henry watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Yes, but barely. She's burning up with fever. An ambulance is on the way. Stay with her and keep her warm, if possible. Henry shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over the girl's small form. Max adjusted his position, continuing to provide what warmth he could. The dog's instinct seemed to understand something Henry was just beginning to grasp. This wasn't just a child in trouble. This was someone who had been surviving alone, and barely surviving at that. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its red and blue lights painting the alley in urgent colors. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs and preparing the girl for transport. "Do you know her?" the lead paramedic asked as they loaded her onto a stretcher. "No, my dog found her. Is she going to be okay? Hard to say right now. Looks like dehydration and possible pneumonia. Could be other things too. Are you planning to ride with us or meet us at the hospital? Henry looked down at Max, who was watching the stretcher with intense focus. The question caught him off guard. He should call someone, social services, the police, someone whose job it was to handle situations like this. But as he watched them wheel the unconscious girl toward the ambulance, something in his chest tightened. "I'll meet you there," he heard himself say. The ride to Cedar Falls General Hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. Henry couldn't shake the image of the girl lying in that alley, so small and alone. Max sat in the passenger seat, unusually quiet, as if he understood the gravity of what they'd witnessed. The emergency room was the controlled chaos Henry remembered from Margaret's final months. Nurses moving with purposeful urgency, machines beeping, and the peculiar mixture of antiseptic and human worry that seemed to permeate all hospitals. He approached the reception desk with Max at his side. "Excuse me, I'm Henry Mitchell. I called the ambulance for the little girl they just brought in." The nurse looked up from her computer. "Are you family?" "No, my dog found her. I just want to make sure she's okay. I understand, but I can only release information to family members or legal guardians. You might want to have a seat. Someone from social services will probably want to speak with you." Henry settled into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed standard in all hospital waiting areas. Max lay at his feet, his head resting. On Henry's shoe, the minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Other patients came and went, a construction worker with a cut hand, a mother with a feverish toddler, an elderly man clutching his chest. Finally, a woman in a rumpled business suit approached them. She looked tired in the way that suggested she'd been dealing with difficult situations all day. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Janet Reynolds from Child Protective Services. I understand you found the girl?" "My dog did, actually. She was unconscious in the alley behind Woolworths." Janet sat down beside him, pulling out a notebook. "Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" Henry recounted the evening's events while Janet took notes. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but he caught her glancing at Max with something that might have been approval. "The thing is," Janet said when he finished, "we can't locate any family members. No missing person reports match her description, and she doesn't have any identification. When she wakes up, if she's willing to talk, we'll know more. But right now, she's a Jane Doe. What happens to her? Once she's medically stable, she'll go into emergency foster care while we investigate her situation. Could be she ran away from an abusive home. Could be she's been living on the streets. Either way, the system will take care of her." Janet said the system didn't inspire confidence. Henry thought about the other children he'd seen over the years. Kids who moved through foster homes like packages being reshipped until they found the right address. Most of them turned out fine, he supposed, but some carried the haunted look of people who had learned too early that safety was temporary. "Can I see her?" Janet hesitated. "She's in pediatric ICU. They're treating her for severe dehydration, malnutrition and pneumonia. She's sedated right now, but..." She studied Henry's face. "You seem like a decent man, Mr. Mitchell. The truth is, when kids wake up in the hospital with no family around, it can be pretty frightening. If you want to sit with her for a while, I don't see the harm." 20 minutes later, Henry found himself in a chair beside a hospital bed where the girl lay connected to various monitors and IV lines. She looked even smaller under the white sheets, her face peaceful in sleep, but marked by the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than simple tiredness. Max had somehow convinced the nursing staff to bend the no pets rule, or perhaps his gentle demeanor and obvious concern for the patient had earned him special dispensation. The dog lay quietly beside Henry's chair, his eyes never leaving the girl's face. Henry wasn't sure what he was doing there. He'd done his civic duty by calling for help, and now professionals were handling the situation. But something about leaving felt wrong, like abandoning someone who had already been abandoned too many times. As the night wore on, nurses came and went, checking vitals and adjusting medications. The girl's fever broke around midnight, and her breathing became less labored. Around 2 in the morning, her eyes fluttered open. She looked confused at first, the way people do when they wake up in unfamiliar surroundings. Then her gaze found Henry, and fear flashed across her features, the learned wariness of someone who had discovered that strange adults usually meant trouble. But then she saw Max. The dog stood slowly, his tail giving a tentative wag. He approached the bed with the careful movements of an animal who understood that sudden gestures might frighten. When he was close enough, he rested his chin on the edge of the mattress. For the first time since Henry had found her, the girl smiled. "Hey, puppy," she whispered, her voice hoarse but gentle. She reached out with a small hand to touch Max's fur. "You're soft." Henry felt something shift inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in 2 years. It wasn't quite hope, but it was the absence of the numbness that had defined his daily existence. "His name is Max," Henry said quietly. "I'm Henry. We're the ones who found you." The girl looked at him again, less afraid now, but still cautious. "Am I in trouble?" The question broke Henry's heart. What kind of life had she lived where waking up in a hospital bed made her worry about being in trouble? "No," he said. "You're safe now. We're just going to make sure you're okay." She nodded and closed her eyes again, but her hand remained on Max's head. Within minutes, she was asleep, but this time her rest seemed peaceful rather than the unconsciousness of illness. Henry settled back in his chair, knowing he wouldn't be leaving any time soon. Max returned to his position on the floor, but kept his watchful gaze on their new patient. Outside, dawn was still hours away. But something had already begun to change in the quiet darkness of the hospital room. The girl's name was Sarah, and she was indeed 8 years old. This information came in fragments over the next 2 days as she slowly recovered and began to trust the steady presence of Henry and Max. She was reluctant to share much more. No last name, no mention of where she'd come from, and absolutely no discussion of family. "I don't want to go back," was all she would say when Janet Reynolds gently pressed for details. "Please don't make me go back." The social worker's experience told her this was likely a runaway situation, possibly involving abuse or neglect. But until Sarah was willing to provide more information, they were at an impasse. The hospital couldn't keep her indefinitely, and the state couldn't place her appropriately without knowing her circumstances. It was Dr. Patricia Williams, the pediatrician overseeing Sarah's care, who suggested the temporary solution. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, finding Henry in the hallway outside Sarah's room, "I understand you've been here around the clock since she was admitted." Henry looked down at himself, rumpled clothes, 2 days of stubble, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleeping in hospital chairs. "Max and we wanted to make sure she was okay. That's very kind of you. The thing is, we're ready to discharge her medically, but Child Services needs a place for her to stay while they sort out her situation. Emergency foster placement can take time, especially when we don't have background information." Dr. Williams paused, studying Henry's face. "Have you ever considered foster care?" The question hit Henry like a physical blow. Foster care meant responsibility, meant opening his carefully ordered life to chaos and need. It meant caring about someone again, which was precisely what he'd been avoiding since Margaret died. No, I don't think I'm qualified for something like that." "Actually, you might be more qualified than you realize. Sarah responds to you and Max in ways she doesn't respond to anyone else. She's been through trauma. That much is clear, and she needs stability and patience to heal. From what I've observed, you seem to possess both qualities in abundance." Janet Reynolds joined the conversation, having overheard from down the hall. "It would only be temporary, a few weeks at most while we locate her family or find permanent placement. You'd need to pass a background check and complete some basic training, but given the circumstances, we could expedite the process." Henry's first instinct was to say no. He wasn't prepared to take care of a child, especially one who had clearly been through significant trauma. His life worked because it was predictable, controlled, limited. Adding an 8-year-old girl to the equation would shatter that careful balance. But then he looked through the window into Sarah's room and saw her sitting up in bed, one arm wrapped around Max's neck, while she whispered secrets into his fur. The dog listened with the patience of a trained therapist, his tail offering gentle wags of encouragement. "What would I have to do?" Henry heard himself ask. The paperwork was surprisingly straightforward. Henry's background check came back clean. 37. Years of business ownership and community involvement had their advantages. The emergency foster care training consisted of a 4-hour session covering basic child welfare principles, trauma responses, and when to call for help. "Remember," Janet emphasized as they completed the final forms, "this is temporary. Sarah needs professional evaluation and therapy to address whatever she's been through. Your job is to provide a safe, stable environment while we figure out the next steps." Henry nodded, but privately wondered what constituted a safe, stable environment for a child who had been living on the streets. His house had been a shrine to his marriage for 2 years. Margaret's things exactly where she'd left them. Her clothes still hanging in the closet, her coffee cup still in the dishwasher. The drive home from the hospital was awkwardly quiet. Sarah sat in the back seat of Henry's truck, clutching the small bag of belongings the hospital had provided. Clean clothes donated by the church auxiliary and a stuffed bear from the pediatric ward. Max sat beside her, his presence clearly more comforting than Henry's awkward attempts at conversation. "Are you hungry?" Henry asked as they pulled into his driveway. "I could make I have sandwich stuff." "I'm okay," Sarah replied, but her voice was small and uncertain. Henry's house was a modest 2-story colonial that had been home for 35 years. He led Sarah inside, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. The outdated furniture, the family, photos that told the story of a life she wasn't part of. The profound silence that came from 2 years of solitary living. The spare room is upstairs," Henry said, juggling Sarah's bag and Max's leash. "It used to be Margaret's, my wife's, craft room, but we can move some things around." Sarah followed him upstairs, Max padding behind them with the easy confidence of someone familiar with the territory. The spare room was exactly as Margaret had left it. Sewing machine in the corner, fabric scraps organized in clear plastic containers, and half-finished projects that would never be completed. "I can clean this out," Henry said, suddenly embarrassed. By the shrine his house had become. "Give you some proper space." "It's okay," Sarah said softly, touching the edge of a quilt that hung over a chair. She made pretty things. The simple observation hit Henry harder than any of the condolences he'd received at Margaret's funeral. This child, this stranger, had looked at his wife's work and seen beauty rather than loss. "She did," he agreed quietly. "She would have. Liked you." That first night was an exercise in mutual awkwardness. Henry made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, burning the first attempt and overcooking the second. Sarah ate without complaint, but her eyes constantly tracked the exits, and she jumped at unexpected sounds. Bedtime proved even more challenging. Sarah had no pajamas except the hospital gown she'd worn, so Henry gave her one of his old t-shirts that hung on her like a dress. When he showed her the bathroom and explained about towels and toothbrushes, she nodded with the serious attention of someone taking notes for a test. "If you need anything during the night, just call," Henry said from the doorway of the craft room, which now contained a hastily made bed with sheets that smelled of lavender fabric softener. "I'm right down the hall." Sarah nodded but didn't speak. Max had positioned himself on the floor beside her bed, apparently having decided that guard duty was his new primary responsibility. Henry lay awake most of that first night, listening for sounds from down the hall. Around 2 in the morning, he heard muffled crying and the soft sound of Max's paws on the hardwood floor. By the time he reached Sarah's door, the crying had stopped. but he could hear her whispering to the dog. "I miss her so much, Max. Grandma used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep. She made everything feel safe." Henry pressed his back against the hallway wall, his heart aching for this little girl who had lost the person who made her feel safe. He understood that feeling all too well, the disorienting experience of waking up each day in a world that felt fundamentally changed. He wanted to go in, to offer comfort, but what did he know about comforting a grieving child? His own grief was still so raw, so present, that he could barely manage his own emotional needs, let alone someone else's. Instead, he returned to his room and lay staring at the ceiling, wondering what he'd gotten himself into and whether he was strong enough to help heal someone else's broken heart when his own remained shattered. Down the hall, Sarah eventually fell asleep with her hand resting on Max's fur, both of them finding comfort in the simple presence of another living being who understood what it meant to love someone who was gone. The brass key to the spare room sat on Henry's nightstand, polished and ready. Tomorrow he would give it to Sarah, a small gesture toward making her feel less like a temporary guest and more like someone who belonged. But belonging, Henry knew, was something that couldn't be unlocked with a key. It had to be earned through patience, trust, and the kind of daily kindness that eventually convinced wounded hearts they were safe enough to begin healing. Outside, Cedar Falls slept peacefully, unaware that two of its most guarded residents had taken the first tentative steps toward opening their hearts again. The second week brought small victories and unexpected challenges. Henry discovered that Sarah was remarkably self-sufficient, too self-sufficient for an 8-year-old. She made her own bed with military precision, cleaned up after herself obsessively, and asked for nothing beyond basic necessities. It was the behavior of a child who had learned that being invisible and undemanding increased her chances of being allowed to stay. "You don't have to be perfect, you know," Henry said one morning, finding Sarah scrubbing the already clean kitchen. "Counter. Kids are supposed to make messes sometimes." Sarah looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. "I don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble," Henry assured her, but he could see she didn't believe him. Trust, he was learning, couldn't be given. It had to be earned through countless small demonstrations of safety and acceptance. The breakthrough came through Margaret's recipe box. Henry had been struggling with meals, his bachelor-level cooking, skills stretched thin by the need to feed a growing child. Sarah ate whatever he put in front of her without complaint. But he could see she wasn't gaining weight the way Dr. Williams had hoped. He was staring into the refrigerator, contemplating. Another night of sandwiches, when Sarah appeared beside him. "My grandma used to make really good mac and cheese," she said quietly. "Not from the box. She made it with real cheese and breadcrumbs on top." "That sounds delicious." "Do you remember how she made it?" Sarah nodded. "She taught me. She said cooking was important because it was how you showed people you cared about them." Henry felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the recognition of shared loss. Margaret had said almost exactly the same thing many times throughout their marriage. "Well," he said, closing the refrigerator door, "maybe you could teach me. I've got cheese, and I think there's some pasta in the pantry." For the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah smiled, really smiled, not the polite expression she wore when she thought it was expected. "I'll need to see your spices," she said, with the seriousness of a professional chef. "Grandma said the secret was in the seasoning." They spent the next hour in the kitchen together, Sarah directing and Henry following instructions. She stood on a chair to reach the stove, stirring the cheese sauce with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Max supervised, from his position by the back door, occasionally offering helpful commentary in the form of tail wags. "Now we add the nutmeg," Sarah said, measuring carefully. "Just a little bit. Grandma said it was like adding sunshine to the cheese." Henry watched her work, noting the way her entire demeanor changed when she talked about her grandmother. The careful guardedness disappeared, replaced by animation and joy. This was what Sarah looked like when she felt safe. Bright, confident, engaged with the world around her. "Tell me more about your grandma," Henry said as they waited for the casserole to bake. Sarah's face lit up. Her name was Eleanor, but everyone called her Ellie. She had grey hair that she wore in a bun, and she always smelled like vanilla because she made cookies all the time. She used to let me help in her garden, and she knew all the names of the flowers and which ones the butterflies liked best. She sounds wonderful. She was. She used to say that families aren't just the people you're born with. They're the people who choose to love you and keep choosing, even when it's hard. Sarah's voice grew softer. She chose me when nobody else wanted me. The words hung in the kitchen air like a challenge. Henry understood that Sarah was telling him something important about her past, but also testing him. Would he choose her too? And if he did, would he keep choosing her when things got difficult? "Your grandmother sounds like a very wise woman," Henry said carefully, "and she was right about families." The mac and cheese was spectacular, creamy and rich with the kind of flavor that came from technique passed down through generations. As they ate, Sarah told him more stories about Eleanor. The songs she sang, the way she read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, her habit of talking to the plants in her garden as if they were old friends. She got sick. "Last winter," Sarah said, as they cleared the dishes. "Her heart wasn't working right anymore. The doctor said she needed to go to the hospital, but she didn't want to leave me alone." Henry stopped loading the dishwasher. "What happened then?" "She made me promise to be brave and take care of myself. She said she would always love me, even when she wasn't here anymore. Then she went to the hospital and—" Sarah's voice trailed off, "and she didn't come back," Henry finished gently. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "After that, they said I had to go live with other families, but none of them were like Grandma. They had rules and schedules, and they wanted me to be grateful all the time. They didn't understand that I just missed her." Henry knelt down so they were at eye level. "I understand missing someone so much it hurts to breathe sometimes. Is that how you feel about Margaret?" The question caught Henry off guard with its directness, but he recognized the courage it took for Sarah to ask. She was sharing her grief with him. The least he could do was return the honesty. "Yes," he said, "every day I miss her. Sometimes I wake up and forget for just a second that she's gone, and then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again." Sarah studied his face with the seriousness of someone far older than her years. "Do you think they can still see us? Grandma and Margaret?" Henry considered the question carefully. He wasn't sure what he believed about life after death, but he knew what Sarah needed to hear. "I think," he said slowly, "that love doesn't just disappear when someone dies. I think the people who loved us want us to be happy and safe, even when they can't be here to make sure of it themselves." "Maybe that's why Max found me," Sarah said, reaching down to pet the dog who had been listening to their conversation with the patience of a trained counselor. "Maybe Grandma and Margaret asked him to take care of both of us." Henry looked at Max, who chose that moment to rest his chin on Sarah's knee with a gentle sigh. The idea wasn't entirely implausible. If love could reach across whatever divide separated life from death, Margaret certainly would have found a way to help heal his loneliness. "Maybe they did," he agreed. That evening marked a turning point in their tentative relationship. Sarah began helping at the hardware store after school, organizing inventory with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything else. Henry's customers took to her immediately. She had a knack for remembering what people needed and could locate items with impressive efficiency. "That little girl of yours is a natural," said Bob Peterson, who owned the pharmacy next door. "She found the exact bolt I needed in about 30 seconds. Took me 20 minutes of searching last time I was in here alone. She's not... We're just..." Henry started to correct him but stopped. The truth was complicated, and Sarah was standing right there, listening. He settled for, "She's been a big help." Sarah beamed at the praise, and Henry realized it had been a while since anyone had made her feel useful rather than burdensome. At the foster homes, she'd been a problem to be managed. Here she was becoming a valued part of the daily routine. The evenings developed their own rhythm. Sarah would work on homework at the kitchen table while Henry balanced the day's receipts. Max stationed himself between them, somehow managing to supervise both activities simultaneously. After dinner, increasingly elaborate meals, as Sarah remembered more of her grandmother's recipes, they would take Max for his walk, then settle in the living room, where Sarah would read aloud, while Henry listened and mended small items from the store. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Sarah asked the question Henry had been dreading. "How long can I stay here?" Henry looked up from the broken saw handle he was gluing back together. Sarah was curled in Margaret's chair with a library book. Max sprawled across her feet like a living blanket. "What do you mean?" Ms. Reynolds said. "This was temporary, until they found somewhere permanent for me." Sarah's voice was carefully neutral, but Henry caught the fear underneath. "I was just wondering how long temporary is." Henry set down his work and studied Sarah's face. She was trying to look casual about the question, but her grip on the book was white-knuckled. "I don't know," he said honestly. "These things take time, I guess." "Oh." Sarah returned her attention to her book, but Henry could see she wasn't really reading anymore. The truth was, he didn't know what he wanted the answer to be. Sarah had disrupted his carefully ordered life in ways both challenging and unexpectedly healing. The house felt different with her in it. Not restored to what it had been with Margaret, but transformed into something new. The silence that had pressed against him for 2 years had been replaced by the sounds of childhood. Footsteps on the stairs, water running in the bathroom, the soft murmur of conversations with Max. But permanent meant responsibility, commitment, opening his heart fully to the possibility of loss again. It meant becoming a father at 62, taking on the care of a child who had already been wounded by the adults who were supposed to protect her. "Sarah," he said carefully, "if you could choose, where would you want to live?" She looked up from her book, studying his face with those 2 serious eyes. "Here," she said without hesitation. "I want to stay here with you and Max, but I know that might not be possible." The simple honesty of her answer hit Henry harder than any declaration of need or plea for help could have. She wasn't asking him to save her. She was just stating what she wanted, while acknowledging that what she wanted might not matter. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you want to stay here?" Sarah considered the question with the gravity of someone much older. "Because you don't try to make me be different than I am. And because Max chose me, and I think maybe you did too, even if you didn't mean to. And because when I'm here, I don't feel like I'm waiting for something bad to happen." Henry felt something shift inside his chest, not the sudden crack of a heart breaking, but the slower, more hopeful sensation of one beginning to heal. Sarah had described exactly what he'd been feeling these past 2 weeks. For the first time since Margaret's death, he wasn't just existing from one day to the next. He was living again, caring about someone again, invested in a future that extended beyond his own solitary needs. "I'd like you to stay too," he said quietly. Sarah's face transformed with a smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire room. "Really, really. But it's not entirely up to us. There are procedures, paperwork, people who have to make sure you're safe and well cared for. Will you try, though? Will you ask them if I can stay?" Henry looked at this little girl, who had somehow slipped past all his defenses and made him remember what it felt like to be needed, to have someone depend on him for more than hardware repairs and friendly conversation. "Yes," he said, "I'll ask them." That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Henry sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and Margaret's recipe box in front of him. Inside were hundreds of index cards covered in his wife's careful handwriting. Not just recipes, but notes about family meals, special occasions, the small acts of love that had made their house a home. He pulled out a fresh index card and wrote "Sarah's mac and cheese" across the top. Below it, he carefully recorded the recipes she'd taught him, along with a note, "First meal we cooked together. She says the secret is adding sunshine to the cheese." As he filed the card alphabetically among Margaret's recipes, Henry realized he wasn't trying to replace what he'd lost. He was building something new, a different kind of family, born not of biology, but of choice, circumstance, and the simple decision to care for each other. The brass key to the spare room still sat on his nightstand, but Henry knew Sarah no longer needed it. She had already unlocked something far more important: his willingness to open his heart again, to risk love despite its potential for loss. Tomorrow, he would call Janet Reynolds and begin the process of making their temporary arrangement permanent. Tonight, he would add Sarah's recipe to his collection and listen to the sounds of a house that was learning to be a home again. The school enrollment process proved more complicated than Henry had anticipated. Cedar Falls Elementary had procedures for everything, and those procedures moved at the pace of bureaucracy rather than the urgency of a child's need for normalcy. "We'll need her previous school records," explained Mrs. Patricia Donovan, the principal, as she reviewed the paperwork Henry had brought. "Immunization records, academic assessments, any special services documentation." "She doesn't have those things," Henry said, trying to keep his voice patient. "She's been in the foster care system. Her records are probably scattered across multiple agencies." Mrs. Donovan, a woman in her 50s with the efficient demeanor of someone who had spent decades navigating educational red tape, frowned at her forms. "Without proper documentation, we can't determine appropriate grade placement or identify any learning needs she might have." Henry looked through the office window at Sarah, who sat in the hallway reading a book that was clearly above grade level. She'd been doing that increasingly, reading books meant for older children, solving math problems with an intuitive grasp that surprised him, displaying knowledge that suggested her education hadn't suffered despite her chaotic living situation. "What if we just test her?" Henry suggested. "See where she fits academically?" "That's not really how we do things here, Mr. Mitchell. We follow state guidelines for enrollment, and those guidelines require documentation," Henry finished. "I understand, but this little girl has been through enough disruption. She needs to be in school, learning, being around other children. Can't we work within the system to make that happen?" Mrs. Donovan studied Henry's face, perhaps recognizing the determination of a man who wasn't going to accept bureaucratic obstacles as final answers. After 30 years in education, she'd seen plenty of children fall through cracks in the system. "Let me make some calls," she said finally. "Emergency placement situations sometimes allow for more flexibility. I can't promise anything, but I'll see what we can do." 2 days later, Sarah walked into Mrs. Jennifer Walsh's third-grade classroom, carrying a new backpack filled with supplies Henry had helped her choose. She wore one of 3 new outfits they'd bought at the local department store, clothes that fit properly and made her look like any other 8-year-old getting ready for school, but looking like other children and feeling like she belonged with them were 2 very different things. Henry waited in the parking lot until dismissal time, fighting the urge to go inside and check on how Sarah's first day was going. Max sat in the passenger seat, equally anxious, his ears perked for any sound that might indicate his charge needed assistance. When Sarah finally emerged from the building, her careful composure was intact, but Henry could read the tension in her shoulders, the way she clutched her backpack straps like a lifeline. "How was it?" he asked as she climbed into the truck. "Fine," Sarah said in the tone children use when they want to end a conversation quickly. Max whined softly and stretched his neck to sniff Sarah's hair, detecting emotional states that humans might miss. Sarah wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in his fur. "Just fine," Henry pressed gently. "The work is easy," Sarah said, her voice muffled. "Mrs. Walsh is nice. The other kids—" She trailed off. "What about the other kids?" Sarah pulled back from Max, but kept one hand on his fur. "They all know each other already. They've been in class together since kindergarten. They have inside jokes and shared memories, and I'm just different." Henry understood that feeling. After Margaret died, He'd felt like an outsider in his own community, watching other couples, other families, knowing he no longer fit in their world of shared experiences and coupled contentment. Different isn't necessarily bad, he said. Sometimes it just takes time for people to get to know you. Some of them asked where I came from. When I said I was living with you, they wanted to know if you were my grandpa. When I said no, they wanted to know where my real family was. Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, but Henry caught the underlying hurt. I didn't know what to tell them. The question of how to explain their relationship had been lurking in Henry's mind for weeks. Were they family? Not in any traditional sense. Was he her guardian? Technically, yes, but temporarily. The uncertainty that worked fine in the privacy of their daily routine became problematic when other people needed labels and explanations. What would you like to tell them? Henry asked. Sarah considered this carefully. I want to tell them that you chose me and I chose you, and that's what makes us family, but I don't think they would understand that. Henry felt that familiar tightness in his chest, not pain this time, but something warmer. Love, he realized. Not the romantic love he'd shared with Margaret, but something equally profound. The protective, nurturing love of someone who had decided to care for a child as if she were his own. I think, Henry said slowly, that anyone worth knowing would understand that perfectly. Over the following weeks, Henry watched Sarah navigate the complex social world of elementary school with the same careful observation skills she'd used to survive on the streets. She learned which children were kind and which ones enjoyed having someone to exclude. She discovered that being good at math earned respect from some quarters and suspicion from others. She found that having Henry pick her up every day in his old truck marked her as different from the kids whose mothers arrived in minivans, decorated with family stick figure decals. But she also found allies. Emma Rodriguez, whose own family had immigrated from Mexico when she was 6, understood what it felt like to be the outsider. Tommy Chen, small for his age and bookish by nature, appreciated having someone who also preferred reading to recess games. Mrs. Walsh, recognizing both Sarah's academic abilities and her social challenges, paired her with study partners who needed her help and could offer friendship in return. The real test came 3 weeks into the school year, during parent-teacher conferences. Henry had been dreading the meeting, uncertain how to present himself in relation to Sarah. He wasn't her father, wasn't her grandfather, wasn't even her legal guardian in any permanent sense. But he was the adult who made sure she did her homework, who signed her permission slips, who would be called if she got sick during the day. Mrs. Walsh greeted him with the professional warmth teachers reserved for engaged parents. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to discussing Sarah's progress. They sat in child-sized chairs around a small table covered with Sarah's work samples. Henry was impressed by what he saw. Neat handwriting, creative story illustrations, math worksheets completed with accuracy that suggested she found the work almost too easy. Sarah is academically gifted, Mrs. Walsh began. Her reading level is at least 2 grades above her age group, and her mathematical reasoning is exceptional. But what impresses me most is her emotional maturity. She's kind to other students, helpful in class, and remarkably resilient. She's been through a lot, Henry said, not sure how much of Sarah's story he should share. I gathered that children who've experienced instability often develop coping mechanisms that make them seem older than they are. But Sarah has something else, genuine empathy. She notices when other children are struggling and finds ways to help without making them feel bad about needing help. Mrs. Walsh showed him a writing assignment where students were asked to describe their hero. Most of the children had chosen superheroes or professional athletes. Sarah had written about her grandmother, describing Eleanor's kindness, wisdom, and the way she made everyone feel loved. At the end, Mrs. Walsh pointed to the final paragraph. She wrote that heroes don't have to be famous or have superpowers. They just have to care about people and keep caring even when it's hard. That's remarkable insight for an 8-year-old. Henry read Sarah's words, feeling pride mixed with something deeper. Recognition. Sarah was describing the kind of person she wanted to become, but also the kind of person she already was. "There is one thing I wanted to discuss," Mrs. Walsh continued. "Some of the other children have been asking questions about Sarah's living situation, not maliciously. They're just curious. Children this age are very aware of family structures, and they notice when someone's situation is different from their own. How has Sarah been handling it?" "Very well, actually. She's developed a simple explanation that seems to satisfy most questions. She says you're her chosen family, and that family is about people who take care of each other." Mrs. Walsh smiled. "Yesterday, when one of the boys was teasing Tommy about being adopted, Sarah spoke up and said that some of the best families are the ones people choose for themselves." Henry felt a surge of protective pride. Sarah was not only surviving the social challenges of school, but standing up for others who faced similar situations. "She's a remarkable little girl, Mr. Mitchell. Whatever you're doing at home, it's working. She feels secure enough to focus on learning and making friends, which tells me she's found the stability she needed." As Henry drove home from the conference, he realized Mrs. Walsh was right. Sarah had found stability, not just in having a roof over her head and regular meals, but in knowing someone cared about her progress, her feelings, her future. She was beginning to trust that this new life wasn't temporary, that she didn't have to hold herself in constant readiness for the next displacement. The school enrollment forms had been more than paperwork. They were Sarah's official entry into the community, her first step toward becoming not just Henry's temporary ward, but a genuine member of Cedar Falls. Every signature, every emergency contact form, every permission slip was a small declaration that she belonged here, that someone was invested in her success and happiness. That evening, as Sarah worked on homework at the kitchen table while Henry balanced the store's receipts, the domestic scene felt less like an arrangement and more like a family finding its rhythm. Max supervised from his position between them, and the house filled with the comfortable sounds of shared purpose and mutual care. The adoption paperwork arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by Janet Reynolds, with the efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. Henry stared at the official document spread across his kitchen table, forms that would legally transform Sarah from his temporary ward into his daughter. "It's a big step," Janet said, accepting the coffee Henry offered. "Permanent adoption means you're taking on all the responsibilities of parenthood, financial support until she's 18, medical decisions, educational choices, everything." Henry studied the papers, noting the weight of official language and legal binding. "What does Sarah think about all this?" "That's actually why I'm here. As part of the process, we need to conduct formal interviews with both of you. Sarah's voice in this decision is important. She's old enough to express her preferences, and the court will take her wishes into consideration." "When?" "Next week. Sarah will meet with a child advocate who specializes in these situations. It's not scary, more like a conversation to make sure she understands what adoption means, and that it's what she really wants." After Janet left, Henry found himself staring at the forms long after his coffee had grown cold. Adoption meant permanence in ways that went beyond legal obligations. It meant being responsible for shaping another human being's character, future, and understanding of the world. It meant accepting that his quiet, ordered life was permanently changed. It also meant the possibility of loss all over again. The thought hit him with unexpected force. What if something happened to Sarah? What if she got sick or hurt or decided when she was older that she didn't want an elderly father? Margaret's death had taught him that love was a beautiful, devastating risk. The more you cared about someone, the more their loss could destroy you. But as he watched Sarah through the window, playing in the backyard with Max, he realized the choice had already been made. He already loved her. The adoption papers wouldn't create that bond. They would simply acknowledge what had already happened. Sarah's interview took place the following Thursday at the county courthouse. Henry waited in the hallway while she met with Rebecca Torres, a child advocate with 20 years of experience helping children navigate the adoption process. When Sarah emerged an hour later, she seemed thoughtful but not distressed. Rebecca walked with her. Both of them engaged in conversation that continued until they reached Henry. "Mr. Mitchell," Rebecca said, "Sarah and I had a very productive talk. She's a remarkable young lady with a clear understanding of what adoption means." "What did she say?" "Why don't you ask her yourself?" Rebecca suggested with a smile. "Sarah, would you like to share what we talked about?" Sarah looked up at Henry with those serious brown eyes. "She asked me if I understood that adoption meant you would be my real dad forever, even when I'm grown up. And I told her yes, and that's what I wanted. She also asked if I understood that it meant I would be your real daughter forever, and that you would love me and take care of me even when I made mistakes or did things wrong. And I said I hoped that was true." Henry knelt down to Sarah's eye level. "It is true, completely true. She asked me why I wanted to be adopted instead of just living with you the way we are now. And I told her that I wanted everyone to know that we chose each other, that we're a real family, even though we didn't start out that way." Rebecca nodded approvingly. Sarah understands that adoption is permanent, that it means taking each other's names, and that she'll have the same legal rights as any biological child. She also understands that it means you're both making a commitment to work through problems together rather than giving up when things get difficult. That evening, Henry and Sarah sat down to dinner with the adoption papers between them on the table. Sarah had prepared her grandmother's meatloaf recipe, another contribution to their growing collection of shared meals and memories. "I have some questions about the adoption," Sarah said as she served herself vegetables. "Important ones." "Okay," Henry said, preparing himself for concerns about permanence, responsibility, or the magnitude of the decision they were making. "If you adopt me, do I have to call you Dad?" The question wasn't what Henry had expected. "What would you like to call me?" "I've been thinking about it a lot. Dad feels, I don't know, like I'm trying to replace someone who was never there to begin with. Henry feels too much like we're not really family." Sarah paused, considering her words carefully. "What if I called you Papa? Grandma used to tell me stories about her papa, and it sounded warmer than Dad, but more special than just using your name." "Papa?" Henry repeated, testing how the word felt. "I like that. And there's something else. If you adopt me, my last name becomes Mitchell, right?" "That's how it usually works, yes." "Sarah Eleanor Mitchell," she said, trying out the full name. "I want to keep Eleanor as my middle name, so Grandma is still part of who I am." Henry felt that familiar tightness in his chest. The recognition of Sarah's wisdom, her ability to honor the past while embracing the future. "I think that's perfect," he said. "Sarah Eleanor Mitchell has a very nice sound to it." They spent the rest of dinner discussing practical matters, what adoption would mean for school records, emergency contacts, and medical decisions. Sarah approached each topic with the seriousness of someone who understood she was helping plan her own future. Later, as they cleaned up the dishes, Sarah asked the question Henry had been expecting. "Papa," she said, testing out the new name, "what if you change your mind someday? What if I turn out to be different than you thought, or more trouble than you expected?" Henry dried his hands on the dish towel and turned to face her. "Sarah, do you remember what you told me about your grandmother? About how she chose to love you and kept choosing, even when it was hard?" Sarah nodded. "That's what real love is. It's not just a feeling that comes and goes. It's a decision you make every day to care about someone, to put their needs alongside your own, to stick with them through good times and bad times." Henry paused, making sure she understood. "I've already been making that choice every day for months. The adoption papers just make it official. But what if something happens to you? What if you get sick like Grandma did?" The fear in her voice was barely contained, and Henry realized Sarah was asking about her deepest terror, not whether he would abandon her, but whether she would lose another person she loved. "I can't promise I'll never get sick or that I'll Live forever, Henry said gently. Nobody can promise that, but I can promise that if something ever happens to me, you'll be taken care of. That's part of what the adoption papers do. They make sure you'll always have a family, even if something changes. How? Henry had actually given this considerable thought during the long nights when he couldn't sleep. Well, my will names you as my heir, which means the house and the store would belong to you, and I've been talking to my lawyer about setting up guardianship with my cousin David in Portland. He and his wife Linda have 3 children of their own, and they've already said they'd welcome you into their family if anything ever happened to me. Sarah absorbed this information with the careful attention she gave to all matters of security and permanence. Have you met them, David and Linda? Many times. They're good people and their children are kind. You'd like them. Henry paused. But that's just a backup plan, Sarah. I'm planning to be around for a very long time. Long enough to see you. Graduate from high school. Maybe even walk you down the aisle someday if you decide to get married. The idea seemed to comfort Sarah, and Henry realized he was comforting himself as well. Planning for Sarah's future made his own future feel more meaningful, more directed towards something beyond his own solitary existence. That night, Henry signed the adoption papers with a fountain pen that had belonged to his father. Sarah watched. The process with the solemnity of someone witnessing a sacred ritual, which in many ways it was. Now what happens? She asked as Henry capped the pen. Now we wait for the court date, where a judge will review everything and make it official. It should be sometime after the 1st of the year. And then I'll really be your daughter? You're already really my daughter, Henry said, pulling her into a hug that she returned with fierce intensity. The papers just make sure everyone else knows it too. That night Sarah fell asleep, clutching the brass key Henry had given her weeks ago. No longer the key to her temporary room, but the key to her permanent home. Max curled up beside her bed, his watchful presence a reminder that some bonds transcend legal documents and official proceedings. In his own room, Henry lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely widower going through the motions of daily life. Now he was preparing to become a father, to take on the responsibility of guiding a remarkable little girl toward adulthood. The adoption papers represented more than legal formality. They were a declaration that healing was possible, that, broken, hearts could find new purposes, and that sometimes the most important families were the ones people chose for themselves. The court summons arrived on a grey December morning, delivered with the casual efficiency of registered mail that would change everything. Henry signed for it absently, expecting routine correspondence about the adoption proceedings. Instead, he found himself staring at legal papers that made his blood run cold. Petition for custody modification and parental rights restoration. Read the header, followed by words that seemed to blur together as Henry tried to process their meaning. Marcus Anthony Davies versus Cedar Falls County Department of Child Services and Henry Mitchell, emergency foster parent. Sarah's father, a man she had never mentioned, someone Henry assumed was either dead or permanently absent from her life, was petitioning for custody. According to the legal documents, Marcus Davies was claiming his constitutional right to parent his biological daughter, arguing that his previous inability to care for her had been temporary and was now resolved. Henry's hand shook as he read. The details. Marcus Davies, age 29, had been incarcerated for drug-related offenses during the time of his daughter's placement with her grandmother. Upon his release 18 months ago, he had been unable to locate Sarah due to her entry into the foster care system. Now, through what appeared to be considerable legal research, he had discovered her whereabouts and was asserting his parental rights. The petition claimed that Mr. Davies had completed court-mandated rehabilitation programs, maintained steady employment for over a year, and secured appropriate housing. He was represented by legal aid attorneys who specialized in family reunification cases, and his petition included character references, employment verification, and proof of completion of parenting classes. Most devastating of all, the petition included a photograph of Sarah as a toddler, a little girl with the same serious brown eyes, sitting on the lap of a young man who shared her delicate features and determined expression. The image was undeniably authentic, proof that Marcus Davies was indeed Sarah's biological father. Henry sank into a kitchen chair, the legal papers scattered before him. His first instinct was to call Janet Reynolds, but something held him back. This wasn't a social services issue anymore. This was a legal battle that would be decided in family court, where biological relationships carried enormous weight and the rights of birth parents were zealously protected. The hearing was scheduled for January 15th, less than a month away. Henry's carefully planned adoption would be put on hold indefinitely, while the court determined whether Sarah's father had legitimate grounds to reclaim custody of his daughter. Sarah arrived home from school 30 minutes later, full of stories about her day and excited about the upcoming holiday break. Henry watched her as she fed Max and started her homework at the kitchen table. Her routine so established, her sense of security so complete. How could he tell her that everything they had built together might be taken away? "Papa, you look sad," Sarah observed, looking up from her math worksheet. "Did something happen at the store?" Henry realized he'd been staring at her with the expression of someone trying to memorize every detail. "No, sweetheart. Just thinking about some paperwork I need to handle." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was too enormous, too frightening to share until he understood what they were facing. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Henry called his lawyer. Richard Coleman had handled the legal aspects of Margaret's estate and had been guiding them through the adoption process. He was a steady, practical man who specialized in family law, but even he sounded shaken when Henry read him the petition over the phone. "This complicates things significantly," Richard said. "Biological parents have strong constitutional rights, especially when they can demonstrate rehabilitation and stability. The fact that he's claiming he was unable to locate Sarah during her grandmother's illness and subsequent foster placements could work in his favor. But he abandoned her," Henry protested. "He was in prison when she needed him most. Drug addiction and incarceration don't permanently terminate parental rights, unless there's been formal legal action to do so. If he can prove he's addressed his problems and is now capable of providing adequate care, the court is likely to favor reunification. What about what Sarah wants? Doesn't her preference matter? It matters, but she's 8 years old. The court will consider her wishes, but they won't be the determining factor. The primary concern is what's in her best interest from a legal standpoint, and that often means preserving the biological family relationship when possible." Henry felt the walls of his carefully rebuilt world closing in. "What do? We fight it. We document every aspect of Sarah's life with you, her stability, her academic progress, her emotional well-being. We gather character witnesses who can testify about the quality of care you've provided and the bond you've formed. We challenge every aspect of his petition and make the court understand what Sarah would lose if she's removed from your home. And if we lose," Richard's pause was answer enough. "Let's focus on building the strongest possible case. I'll need to interview Sarah to understand her relationship with her father and her feelings about the situation." After hanging up, Henry sat in his dark kitchen, staring at the legal papers that threatened to destroy the fragile family they had built. Max appeared beside his chair, sensing distress with the intuitive understanding that made him such a perfect companion. The dog rested his head on Henry's knee, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. Henry thought about Sarah upstairs, sleeping peacefully in a room that had become truly hers, surrounded by books and clothes and the accumulated evidence of a child who felt safe and loved. How could he explain to her that someone she barely remembered was claiming the right to take her away? from the only stable home she'd known since her grandmother's death. The next morning brought another shock. Henry was opening the hardware store when a man approached from the parking lot, young, lean, with Sarah's dark hair and serious eyes. He moved with the controlled confidence of someone who had learned hard lessons about patience and persistence. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Marcus Davies. I think we need to talk." Henry's first instinct was to refuse, to refer Marcus to the lawyers and the courts. But looking at this young man, Sarah's father, he saw someone who appeared genuinely concerned rather than opportunistic. "What do you want?" Henry asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I want to see my daughter. I want to understand what her life has been like since I've been gone. And I want to figure out how we can do what's best for her." "You've been gone for years," Henry said. "She doesn't even remember you." Marcus flinched as if Henry had struck him. "I know that. I know I failed her when she needed me most. I was young and I was stupid, and I made choices that hurt the people I loved most, but I'm not that person anymore." "So you've come to take her away from the only stability she's known?" "I've come to claim my daughter," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She's my blood, Mr. Mitchell, my family. I have rights." "Rights?" Henry felt anger building in his chest. "Where were your rights when she was living on the streets? Where were your rights when she was so sick she nearly died in an alley? Marcus, impaled. She was on the streets for weeks. After the foster placements failed, she decided she was safer alone than with strangers who didn't care about her. She was 8 years old, surviving on scraps from dumpsters and sleeping in doorways." The young man's composure cracked. "I didn't know. I thought she was safe with Eleanor, and then when Eleanor died, I thought the system would take care of her. I was trying to get my life together so I could provide for her properly. Well, the system failed her, and she's been taking care of herself until Max found her collapsed on the street." Henry paused, studying Marcus's face. "Tell me something. Do. You know what her favorite food is? What she likes to read, whether she has nightmares, what makes her laugh?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "No," he admitted, "I don't know those things." "I do. I know she makes mac and cheese with nutmeg because her grandmother taught her that was the secret ingredient. I know she reads books meant for children, twice her age, because she has her grandmother's intelligence and curiosity. I know she sometimes has nightmares about being alone and hungry, but she sleeps peacefully when Max is nearby. I know she laughs when she's teaching me to cook, and she cries when she thinks I'm not looking because she misses Eleanor." Marcus stood silently, absorbing this information about a daughter who had become a stranger to him. "I know," Henry continued, "that she calls me Papa because it feels warmer than Dad, but more special than just my name. I know she wants to keep Eleanor as her middle name when I adopt her because she doesn't want to forget where she came from. I know she's terrified that someone she loves will disappear again, and I know she's finally starting to believe that might not happen." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I want to know those things too. I want to be her father." "Then why are you trying to take her away from the life she's built here?" "Because she's my daughter," Marcus said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Because I've gotten my life together and I can provide for her now, because I love her." "Love?" Henry's voice was sharp. "You can't love someone you don't know. You can love the idea of her. You can love your memories of her when she was small. But you can't love who she is now because you haven't been here to see who she's become." The accusation hung in the morning air between them. Marcus stood quietly, perhaps realizing for the first time that legal rights and emotional bonds were very different things. "What if—" Marcus started, then stopped. "What if I withdrew the petition?" Henry felt a surge of hope. "Would you do that?" "Maybe. If I could be part of her life somehow. If I could get to know her again, see that she's happy and safe with you." Marcus paused. "I don't want to hurt her, Mr. Mitchell. I just want to be her father." "Being a father and wanting to be a father are different things too," Henry said gently. "Being a father means putting her needs before your own wants. It means protecting her from disruption and uncertainty. It means letting her choose the life that makes her feel safest and most loved. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, watching the traffic move through Cedar Falls' small downtown. Finally, he spoke. "Can I meet her? Not as someone trying to take her away, just as someone who knew her when she was little." Henry considered the request. Sarah deserved to know that her father was alive and cared about her, even if she chose to stay where she was. But she also deserved to make that choice, without pressure or manipulation. "If you really mean it about putting her needs first," Henry said, "then yes. But she gets to decide how much contact she wants, if any. And if she says no, you respect that. Fair enough? And Marcus, if this is some kind of strategy to strengthen your legal case, if you're planning to use whatever she says against us in court, then the answer is no. She's been hurt enough by adults who put their own needs first." Marcus met Henry's eyes directly. "It's not a strategy. I just want to see who my little girl has become." That afternoon, Henry faced the most difficult conversation of his life. He sat Sarah down at the kitchen table where they'd shared so many meals and talked through so many problems. "Sweetheart, there's something I need to tell you. Something important about your family." Sarah immediately looked worried. "Are you sick? Are you going away?" "No, nothing like that. This is about your birth father. He's been looking for you, and he's found out where you are." Sarah went very still. "My father? His name is Marcus. He says he's been getting his life together, and he wants to see you." "I don't remember him very much," Sarah said quietly. "Just little pieces. He had dark hair like mine. He used to sing to me sometimes, but then he went away, and Grandma said he couldn't take care of me anymore." "That's right. He wasn't able to take care of you then, but he says he's different now." Sarah studied Henry's face with those serious brown eyes. "Does he want me to go live with him?" Henry's heart ached at the fear in her voice. "I don't know what he wants exactly, but I want you to know that whatever happens, I'll do everything I can to protect you and make sure you're safe." "I don't want to leave," Sarah said, her voice small but determined. "I want to stay here with you and Max. This is my home. I want that too, sweetheart, more than anything. Can I tell him that? Can I tell him I'm happy here and I want to stay?" "Yes, and if you want to meet him, we can arrange that, but only if you want to. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." Sarah considered this carefully. I think I would like to see him, just to remember what he looks like, but I want you there too." "Of course, we'll do this together." That evening, Henry called Marcus and arranged a meeting for the following Saturday at the park where Sarah liked to play with Max. It would be neutral territory, public and safe, with plenty of space for Sarah to maintain whatever distance felt comfortable. As Henry hung up the phone, he realized that this meeting would determine not just Sarah's future, but the future of the family they had built together. Everything they had worked for, all the trust and love and healing that had taken place over the past months, now hung in the balance. But as he watched Sarah helping Max with his evening brushing ritual, chattering to the dog about her day at school, Henry felt a fierce determination rise in his chest. This was his daughter in every way that mattered. This was his family. And he would fight with everything he had to protect what they had built together. The court papers might give Marcus Davies legal standing, but they couldn't account for the deeper bonds of choice, commitment, and daily love. Saturday would be the beginning of a battle for Sarah's future, and Henry intended to win. The meeting with Marcus took place on a crisp Saturday morning in mid-December. Sarah had dressed carefully in her favorite sweater, the blue one Henry had bought her for Thanksgiving, and insisted on bringing a thermos of hot chocolate to share. Her nervousness showed in small ways. The careful braiding of her hair, the way she checked her reflection twice in the hallway mirror, her quiet conversation with Max about being brave. Henry watched her prepare with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. At 8 years old, she was demonstrating more emotional courage than many adults possessed. She was choosing to face her fear of the unknown in order to understand her own story. They arrived at Riverside Park early, claiming a picnic table near the playground, where Sarah and Max often spent their Saturday afternoons. The familiar setting seemed to calm her nerves, and by the time Marcus appeared on the walking path, she was feeding Max small pieces of her breakfast muffin and chattering about her upcoming Christmas program at school. Marcus approached slowly, giving Sarah time to observe him without pressure. Henry had to admit the young man had made an effort. Clean clothes, freshly shaved, walking with the careful respect of someone who understood he was entering sacred territory. Sarah studied him with the intense focus she brought to everything important. Henry could see her searching her memories, trying to connect this adult stranger with fragments of early childhood. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus said when he reached their table. His voice was gentle, uncertain. "I'm Marcus. I used to know you when you were very little." "I know," Sarah said simply. "You're my birth father." The clinical term hit Marcus visibly. To Sarah, he wasn't dad or even father. He was a biological relationship that required explanation, rather than a person who had earned a place in her emotional vocabulary. "That's right," he said, settling carefully onto the bench across from them. "You were about 3 the last time I saw you. You probably don't remember much about me." "I remember some things," Sarah said thoughtfully. "You had a guitar. You used to play songs about birds." Marcus's face transformed with surprised pleasure. "You remember that? I can't believe you remember the bird songs. Grandma said I used to ask her to sing them after you went away, but she didn't know all the words." Sarah paused, studying his face. "Where did you go?" The question was asked with a child's directness, cutting through adult euphemisms to the heart of the matter. Marcus glanced at Henry, perhaps hoping for guidance. But Henry remained silent. This was Marcus's opportunity to explain himself to his daughter. "I made some very bad choices," Marcus said carefully. "I got involved with people who weren't good for me, and I did things that were against the law. I had to go away for a while to learn how to make better choices." "Prison," Sarah said, not asking but confirming. "Yes, prison." Sarah absorbed this information without apparent judgment. Her experiences with the foster system had taught her that adult lives were complicated, that good people sometimes ended up in difficult situations. "Why didn't you come find me when you got out?" Marcus looked uncomfortable, but he answered honestly. "I tried, but when your grandmother died, you went into foster care, and the system makes it hard for someone with my history to find out where their children are placed. It took me a long time to track you down. But you found me now." "Yes, I found you." "Now," Marcus paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've changed. I have a job now and an apartment, and I've been clean for 2 years. I want to be your father again, if you'll let me." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing this information with the careful thought she gave to all important decisions. Max, sensing the emotional weight of the conversation, moved closer to her side. "What does that mean, being my father again?" she asked finally. "It means you would come live with me. I'd take care of you, make sure you had everything you needed. We'd be a family." "But I already have a family," Sarah said, looking at Henry. "Papa takes care of me. We live together and Max is our dog, and I have my own room with all my books. I go to school here and I have friends. This is my family now." Marcus's face fell, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I'm your real father, Sarah. Blood family. That's different from this situation." Henry felt his temper rising at the dismissive way Marcus referred to their relationship, but Sarah's response surprised him. Grandma used to say that real family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses to love you every day, even when it's hard. Sarah's voice was steady, mature beyond her years. "Papa chose me when I was sick and alone. He takes me to school and helps with my homework and makes sure I'm safe. He doesn't want me to be grateful. He just wants me to be happy. That feels more real to me than blood." Marcus was quiet, perhaps realizing that his daughter had grown up in ways he hadn't anticipated. "But don't you want to know me? Don't you want to be with your real father?" I do want to know you, Sarah said thoughtfully. I want to understand where I came from and hear the bird songs again, but I don't want to leave my home to do that. What? What if I moved here to Cedar Falls? Marcus asked suddenly. What if I got a job here so I could be near you, see you regularly? Would that be something you'd want? Sarah looked at Henry, seeking guidance. Henry realized this was a moment that would define not just their immediate future, but Sarah's understanding of how adults handle difficult situations. That would be up to you, sweetheart, Henry said. If you wanted to spend time with Marcus, I'd support that, but you'd still live with me, still be my daughter. Could we do that? Sarah asked Marcus. Could you be my birth father who visits, and Papa could be my real father who takes care of me every day? Marcus struggled visibly with this compromise. It wasn't what he'd envisioned when he'd filed his custody petition. He'd imagined reclaiming his daughter, rebuilding the relationship they'd had when she was small, creating the family he'd dreamed about during his time in prison. But looking at Sarah, confident, articulate, surrounded by obvious love and security, he began to understand what Henry had tried to tell him. She wasn't the 3-year-old he remembered. She was a remarkable 8-year-old who had survived trauma, found healing, and built a life that worked for her. I need to think about that, he said honestly. It's not what I expected. That's okay, Sarah said, with the patience of someone who understood that adults needed time to process difficult emotions. Thinking is good. Papa thinks about important things a lot before he decides. They spent another hour at the park, Sarah showing Marcus her favorite climbing tree and explaining the rules of the games she played with Max. Marcus listened with the careful attention of someone trying to memorize details, perhaps beginning to understand that getting to know his daughter would be a gradual process rather than an immediate reclamation. When it was time to leave, Sarah surprised everyone by giving Marcus a hug. I'm glad you came to find me, she said. Even if I can't come live with you, I'm glad you're okay now. Marcus held her carefully, as if she might disappear if he held too tight. I'm glad you're okay too, baby girl. You're so much braver and smarter than I expected. Grandma said, "You got that from you," Sarah said. The brave part. She said you were brave too, just sometimes in the wrong directions. After Marcus left, Henry and Sarah walked Max through the park's nature trail, both of them processing the morning's events. Sarah seemed thoughtful, but not distressed, as if meeting her birth father had answered questions she hadn't known she was carrying. Are you okay? Henry asked as they paused to let Max investigate an interesting smell. I think so. He seems nice, but also sad, like he wants something he can't have. What do you think he wants? He wants me to be little again, when he was my whole world. But I'm not little anymore, and he's not my whole world. You are. Sarah looked up at Henry with those serious eyes. Does that make me a bad daughter? It makes you a wise daughter, Henry said, pulling her into a hug. And it makes you my daughter, completely and forever. That afternoon brought another development that changed everything. Marcus called Henry, his voice tight with emotion. I've been thinking about what Sarah said today, he began, about real family being the people who choose to love you every day. And I realized something. I haven't earned the right to be her everyday father. You have. Henry waited, sensing there was more. I'm going to withdraw the custody petition, Marcus continued. I want to be part of her life, but not as someone who disrupts the stability she's found with you. Would you be willing to work something out? Maybe I could move to Cedar Falls like I mentioned, see her regularly, but not try to take her away from you. Relief flooded through Henry like physical warmth. Yes, absolutely yes. There's one more thing I want to ask. When you adopt her, and I hope you do, would you consider letting her keep Davies as part of her name? Sarah Eleanor Davies Mitchell, maybe? I know I don't have the right to ask for much, but I'd like her to carry some piece of her biological family forward. Henry thought about Sarah's insistence on keeping Eleanor as her middle name, her wisdom about honoring the past while embracing the future. I'll ask her, he said. It should be her choice. Thank you. And Henry? Thank you for saving my daughter's life. Thank you for loving her when I couldn't be there to do it myself." That evening, Henry called Richard Coleman with the news that Marcus was withdrawing his petition. The adoption could proceed as planned, with the added complexity of arranging visitation rights for Sarah's birth father. "This is the best possible outcome," Richard said. "Sarah gets to keep the stability she's found with you, while also having the opportunity to know her biological father. It's exactly what family court judges hope for in these situations." As Henry hung up the phone, he realized that their family was about to expand rather than be threatened. Sarah would have her papa, who provided daily love and security, her birth father, who could share her history and heritage, and Max, who had brought them all together. It wasn't the family structure any of them had imagined, but it was the family structure Sarah needed, and that, Henry understood, was what mattered most. The courthouse in Cedar Falls had seen better days: worn marble floors that echoed footsteps, high windows that filtered January sunlight into pale rectangles on wooden benches. Henry adjusted his tie for the third time, his hands steadier than his nerves, as he watched Sarah color carefully in a legal pad his lawyer had given her. She had insisted on wearing her best dress, navy blue, with tiny white flowers that Margaret would have loved, and had braided her hair with the precision she brought to everything important. In her lap sat a manila folder containing something she'd worked on for days but hadn't shown him yet. "All rise," called the bailiff. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Hoffman presiding." Judge Hoffman was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades making decisions about children's futures. She settled behind her bench and reviewed the paperwork before her with the careful attention such decisions deserved. "This is the matter of the petition for adoption filed by Henry Mitchell on behalf of the minor child Sarah Eleanor Davies," Judge Hoffman began. "I understand we have an unusual situation here, with the biological father's consent being obtained after initially contesting the proceedings." Richard Coleman rose from their table. "That's correct, Your Honor. Mr. Marcus Davies withdrew his custody petition and has consented to the adoption, with a request for continued visitation rights." "And where is Mr. Davies today?" "Present in the courtroom, Your Honor." Richard gestured to where Marcus sat in the gallery, dressed in his best clothes and looking nervous but determined. Judge Hoffman nodded and turned her attention to the papers before her. "Mr. Mitchell, please approach the bench with Sarah." Henry stood, his legs surprisingly shaky after months of preparation. Sarah slipped her small hand into his and walked beside him to the front of the courtroom. She looked around with curious interest rather than fear, as if she were witnessing an important ceremony rather than undergoing a legal proceeding. "Sarah," Judge Hoffman said gently, "do you understand what's happening here today?" "Yes, ma'am. Papa is adopting me so I can be his real daughter forever." "And is that what you want?" Sarah's response was immediate and certain. "Yes, ma'am, very much." Judge Hoffman smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Henry had seen from her. "Can you tell me why you want Mr. Mitchell to adopt you?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, preparing to give what was clearly a carefully considered answer. "Papa takes care of me every day. He makes sure I have food and clothes and a safe place to sleep. He helps with my homework and takes me to school and to the doctor when I'm sick. He doesn't get mad when I have bad dreams or when I miss my grandma. He lets me help at his store, and he learns my grandma's recipes so we can cook them together." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But mostly, I want him to adopt me because he chose me. When I was sick and alone, he could have just made sure I got to the hospital and then walked away. But he stayed with me, and he brought me home, and he decided to love me even though I wasn't his biological daughter. That makes him my real papa." Henry felt tears building behind his eyes. Even after months of daily conversations, Sarah's ability to articulate profound truths with simple clarity continued to amaze him. "That's a very thoughtful answer," Judge Hoffman said. "Now, I understand your biological father is here today. How do you feel about that? Sarah glanced back at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. I'm glad he came. I want him to see that I'm happy and safe. And I want him to know that even though I can't live with him, I'm glad he found me. Do you want to continue having a relationship with your biological father? Yes, Mom. He's part of where I came from, and I think that's important. Papa says families can be bigger than just the people who live in the same house. Judge Hoffman turned to Henry. Mr. Mitchell, you've heard Sarah's testimony. Are you prepared to take on all the responsibilities of legal parenthood for this child? Yes, Your Honor, completely. That includes financial support, medical decisions, educational choices, and emotional guidance through adolescence and into adulthood. It means putting her needs before your own convenience, supporting her dreams even when they differ from your own plans, and providing stability and love for the next 10 years at minimum. Henry looked down at Sarah, who was watching him with complete trust and confidence in his answer. Your Honor, I've already been doing those things for the past 8 months. The legal papers will just make official what's already true in our hearts. And how do you feel about maintaining a relationship between Sarah and her biological father? I support whatever arrangement makes Sarah feel most secure and loved. Mr. Davies is part of her history, and she deserves to understand where she comes from. Judge Hoffman made notes on the papers before her, then looked back at Sarah. I understand you have something you'd like to share with the court? Sarah nodded eagerly and opened the manila folder she'd been clutching. I wrote a letter about what family means to me. May I read it? Please do. Sarah unfolded a piece of paper covered in her careful handwriting and began to read in her clear, serious voice. Dear Judge Hoffman, Sarah read, her voice steady and clear. My name is Sarah Eleanor Davies, and I want to tell you about families. I used to think families were just the people you were born with. My grandma Eleanor was my family because she took care of me after my mom died and my birth father couldn't take care of me. She taught me that families are the people who love you every day, even when you make mistakes or feel sad. When Grandma died, I thought I didn't have a family anymore. The foster homes tried to be my family, but it didn't feel real. They had their own children who belonged there, and I was just visiting. I felt like I was always waiting for someone to decide I didn't fit. Then I got sick and scared, and I thought maybe I would die alone, like some of the people I saw on the streets. But Max found me. Max is Papa's dog, but he chose to protect me when I was lying on the cold ground. He didn't know me, but he decided I was worth saving. When Papa came to get Max, he found me too. He could have just called the ambulance and walked away, but he didn't. He stayed with me at the hospital even though I was a stranger. He let me come live in his house even though he was used to being by himself. He taught me that choosing to love someone is more important than being related to them by blood. Papa makes me feel safe every day. He doesn't get frustrated when I can't remember how to do math problems, and he doesn't get mad when I have nightmares about being alone. He lets me cook Grandma's recipes so I don't forget where I came from. He reads to me every night and tucks me in and makes sure Max is there if I get scared. But the most important thing Papa does is he listens to me. When I said I wanted to meet my birth father, Papa was scared I might want to leave, but he helped me do it anyway, because he knew it was important to me. When I said I wanted to keep Eleanor as my middle name, he said that was perfect because honoring the past makes the present more special. My birth father, Marcus, loves me too, but in a different way. He loves the little girl he remembers from before he went away. Papa loves the person I am right now, today, even the parts of me that are difficult or sad. Marcus wants me to be happy, but Papa helps me learn how to be happy. I think some kids are lucky because they're born into families that work perfectly. But some of us have to build our families from people who choose us. That's what Papa and I did. We chose each other, and Max chose both of us, and now we're a real family. I want Papa to adopt me because I want everyone to know that we belong together. I want the same last name so people understand that he's my real father, not just someone taking care of me temporarily. I want him to be able to make decisions about my school and my doctor visits and all the important things parents do. Marcus will always be my birth father, and I want to know him better. But Papa will be my everyday father, my real father, the one who teaches me how to be a good person and helps me grow up. That's what adoption means to me, making it official that we choose each other every single day. Thank you for reading my letter and for helping us become a legal family. Love, Sarah Eleanor Davies. As Sarah folded the letter and returned it to her folder, the courtroom was completely silent. Henry saw several people in the gallery wiping their eyes, including Marcus, who was looking at his daughter with an expression of profound sadness and equally profound pride. Judge Hoffman cleared her throat softly. Thank you, Sarah. That was beautifully written and very helpful for the court to understand your feelings. She turned to Marcus in the gallery. Mr. Davies, would you like to make any statement before I render my decision? Marcus stood slowly, his hands clasped in front of him. Your Honor, I came here today, planning to fight for custody of my daughter, but listening to her, seeing how happy and secure she is, I realize that would be selfish. Sarah doesn't need me to be her everyday father. She already has one, and he's doing a better job than I could have dreamed of. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I made mistakes that cost me the right to raise my daughter. Mr. Mitchell stepped in when I couldn't, and he's given her something I never could: complete stability and unconditional love. I support this adoption completely, and I'm grateful that Sarah still wants me to be part of her life. Judge Hoffman nodded and made final notes on her papers. The courtroom held its collective breath as she prepared to announce her decision. And the matter of the adoption petition filed by Henry Mitchell. She began formally. The court finds that the adoption is in the best interests of the minor child, Sarah Eleanor Davies. The petition is granted. She smiled at Sarah, who was beaming with joy. Sarah, would you like your new legal name to include Davies as your birth father requested? Sarah looked back at Marcus, then up at Henry. Yes, please. Sarah Eleanor Davies. Mitchell. That way, everyone who helped make me who I am is part of my name. Judge Hoffman signed the final papers with ceremonial flourish. Congratulations, Mr. Mitchell. Sarah is now legally your daughter. Henry pulled Sarah into a hug as Max, who had somehow convinced the bailiff to let him stay in the courtroom, trotted up to join their celebration. Their family was finally, officially, complete. 6 months later, Sarah Eleanor Davies Mitchell stood in the backyard of their home, directing Henry's placement of tomato plants with the authority of someone who had inherited her grandmother's gardening wisdom. Max supervised from his favorite spot under the oak tree, his golden coat now showing threads of gray that matched Henry's hair. Peppa, the basil needs to go closer to the tomatoes, Sarah instructed, consulting the hand-drawn garden plan she'd created. Grandma always said they were friends that helped each other grow. Henry adjusted the spacing obediently, marveling at how naturally Sarah combined Eleanor's teachings with her own observations. At 9 years old, she had grown 3 inches and gained 15 pounds of healthy weight. More importantly, she had developed the confident bearing of a child who knew she was loved unconditionally. The adoption had been final for 4 months now, but the real changes were subtler and more profound than legal documents could capture. Sarah no longer startled at unexpected sounds or hoarded food in her dresser drawers. She argued with Henry about bedtimes and chores like any normal child, secure enough in their relationship to test boundaries without fearing abandonment. Their Saturday routine had evolved to include Marcus, who had indeed moved to Cedar Falls and found work as a mechanic at Peterson's Auto Repair. Every other weekend, he took Sarah to lunch or helped with her school projects, gradually building the kind of relationship that honored their shared history without disrupting her daily stability. I think Marcus should come for dinner Sunday, Sarah announced as she patted soil around a pepper plant. He's never had your famous lasagna, and I told him it was almost as good as my mac and cheese. Almost as good? Henry feigned offense. I'll have you know that lasagna took me 3 attempts to perfect, which is exactly why it's almost as good as my mac and cheese, which I got right the first time because I had a better teacher. Sarah grinned at him with the confident sass of a child who knew her teasing would be met with laughter rather than irritation. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted their gardening. Sarah looked up to see Emma Rodriguez and her mother arriving for what had become a regular Saturday playdate. Over the past year, Emma had become Sarah's closest friend, drawn together by their shared experience of building families from scratch. Emma's through immigration, Sarah's through choice and circumstance. Mrs. Rodriguez brought tamales again, Sarah observed, watching Emma's mother carry a covered dish toward the house. She's trying to teach you proper Mexican cooking because she says your attempts are very sweet, but not quite right, Henry chuckled. Maria Rodriguez had indeed taken on his culinary education as a personal mission, claiming that any man raising a daughter needed to understand the healing power of authentic comfort food. Her kitchen lessons had become social gatherings that included other parents from Sarah's school, gradually weaving Henry into the community fabric in ways his solitary years had never allowed. "Sarah," Emma called from the back porch. "Mum says we can make cookies if we promise not to make a huge mess." Sarah looked at Henry for permission, a courtesy that had evolved naturally rather than from any rules he'd established. "Go ahead," he said. "Just remember that Max gets very interested in cookie making, so you might want to give him a job to keep him out of trouble." As the girls disappeared into the house with excited chatter about chocolate chip versus oatmeal raisin, Henry found himself alone in the garden that was becoming Margaret's memorial and Sarah's legacy combined. He had planted Margaret's favorite roses along the fence, but Sarah had added vegetables and herbs, creating a space that honored the past while nurturing the present. The kitchen window above him framed a scene of domestic chaos. Sarah and Emma measuring ingredients while Maria supervised, and Max positioned himself strategically for dropped cookie dough. It was the kind of scene he had never imagined when he'd set out for that evening walk 8 months ago. His phone buzzed with a text from Janet Reynolds, who had stayed in touch even after the adoption finalized. Saw Sarah's picture in the paper. From the school spelling bee. "Second place in the county. Congratulations. Hope you're both doing well." Henry smiled, remembering Sarah's determined preparation for the spelling bee and her philosophical acceptance of second place. "I got farther than I expected," she'd said afterward, "and now I know what to study harder for next year." It was vintage Sarah, analytical, goal-oriented, and possessed of a quiet confidence that suggested she expected good things to happen because she was willing to work for them. That evening, after Emma had gone home and Marcus had joined them for dinner as Sarah had suggested, Henry found himself in the living room with a photo album Sarah had insisted they create. It documented their journey from that first night in the hospital through the adoption ceremony and into their current daily life. "Look at this one," Sarah said, pointing to a picture Maria Rodriguez had taken during one of their cooking lessons. Henry was covered in flour, Sarah was laughing at something Max had done, and Marcus was in the background, looking slightly overwhelmed by the domestic chaos, but smiling nonetheless. "We look like a real family," Sarah observed with satisfaction. "We are a real family," Henry corrected gently. "I know, but we also look like one, which is different." Sarah studied the photo thoughtfully. "Remember when I used to worry that people could tell I didn't really belong anywhere? Now when people look at us, they see a family that fits together." Henry understood exactly what she meant. The awkward uncertainty that had marked their early days had been replaced by the easy rhythm of people who knew their roles and trusted each other to fulfill them. Sarah was his daughter in every way that mattered, and he was her father, not because of biology or legal documents, but because they had chosen each other daily for nearly a year. As he helped Sarah add the latest photos to their album, Henry realized that the family portrait sitting on the mantel, the professional photo they'd had taken after the adoption, wasn't replacing Margaret's picture. It was joining a gallery that told the complete story of his capacity to love, Margaret's photo representing the love that had shaped him into someone capable of nurturing, and Sarah's photo representing the love that had called him back to life when he thought his story was over. "Papa," Sarah said as she closed the album, "do you think Grandma and Margaret would be happy about how things turned out?" Henry considered the question seriously, as he did all of Sarah's inquiries about the people they'd lost. "I think they would be very proud of both of us. Your grandmother would be amazed at how strong and wise you've become, and Margaret would be happy that our house is full of laughter again. And Max would be happy that he has two people to take care of instead of just one lonely person." As if summoned by his name, Max appeared beside the couch and rested his graying muzzle on Sarah's knee. The dog had aged visibly over the past year, but his eyes remained bright with the satisfaction of a job well done. He had found Sarah in that alley, brought Henry into her life, and supervised their transformation from strangers to family with the patient wisdom of someone who understood that the best things were worth waiting for. "Time for bed, sweetheart," Henry said, noting that Sarah's eyelids were beginning to droop despite her efforts to stay awake for their evening ritual. As they climbed the stairs together, Max following with the careful steps of an older dog who still took his guardian duties seriously, Henry reflected on how completely his life had changed. The quiet desperation that had defined his days after Margaret's death had been replaced by the purposeful chaos of raising a remarkable child. His house had been transformed from a shrine to the past into a launching pad for the future. Sarah's room, no longer the craft room but genuinely hers, reflected her personality in ways that would have been unimaginable when she first arrived. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that ranged from picture books she'd outgrown, but couldn't bear to discard, to young adult novels that challenged her growing intellect. Her desk held homework assignments, art projects, and letters from Marcus that she treasured even when his occasional mistakes in spelling or grammar revealed his own interrupted education. "Papa," Sarah said as Henry tucked her in, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "When I'm grown up and have children of my own, I want to tell them this story, about how sometimes the best families are the ones that find each other when they need each other most." Henry felt that familiar tightness in his chest, not pain anymore, but overwhelming gratitude for the privilege of witnessing Sarah's growth into someone who understood that love was both a gift and a choice. "That sounds like a very good story to tell," he agreed. "Will you help me remember all the details, so I get it right when I'm older?" "I'll help you remember," Henry promised. "That's what fathers do. They help their children remember the important parts of their stories." As Henry turned off the light and headed toward his own room, he paused in the hallway to look out the window toward Main Street, where this journey had begun on a rainy evening when Max had refused to walk past an alley. The streetlights illuminated the same pavement where Sarah had collapsed, but now it looked different to him, not like a place where desperate things happened, but like the spot where two broken hearts had found each other and decided to heal together. Tomorrow would bring the usual Saturday activities. Breakfast at the diner where everyone knew Sarah's name, a trip to the hardware store where she continued to amaze customers with her organizational skills, and an afternoon at the park where Marcus would join them for what had become their weekly tradition. It was an ordinary life, built from extraordinary circumstances, sustained by the daily choice to care for each other. In his own room, Henry opened the drawer that had once held only Margaret's wedding ring. Now it also contained Sarah's first report card from Cedar Falls Elementary, the program from her school's Christmas concert, and a Father's Day card she'd made him that read, "Thank you for choosing me back," in her careful handwriting. The ring was still there too, no longer a symbol, of ending, but a reminder that love could take many forms throughout a single lifetime. Margaret's love had taught him how to be a partner. Sarah's love was teaching him how to be a father. Both relationships had transformed him, and neither diminished the other. As Henry settled into sleep, he could hear the familiar sounds of his house at night. Sarah's gentle breathing from down the hall, Max's contented sighs from his position between their rooms, the settling creaks of a home that sheltered the people it was meant to protect. These sounds no longer emphasized his solitude. They confirmed his belonging. Outside, Cedar Falls slept peacefully under stars that had witnessed countless stories of loss and recovery, ending and beginning, the eternal cycle of hearts learning to love again despite the risk of future sorrow. In one modest house on Maple Street, 3 souls who had found each other in their greatest need continued the quiet work of building a family that would last, not because it was perfect, but because it was chosen new each day with gratitude, patience, and the steady certainty that some bonds transcend the circumstances of their creation. The golden retriever who had started it all dreamed of sunny afternoons and the satisfaction of a job completed exactly as it should be, while the man and child he had brought together dreamed of all the ordinary tomorrows that stretched ahead, precious in their simplicity, profound in their promise, and absolutely perfect in their imperfection.